Never used foam. Never built a tabletop house.
What are we waiting for?
Watching Lockie at Zorpazorp build Minas Tirith along with all of the other collaborators has been an amazing project. He started it during COVID-19 as a way of keeping the community connected to each other and supporting each other, and a little while ago Lockie was looking for a remote editor. I applied and I linked my M&Hen work which I've been doing to it, and after a couple of emails he invited me on board the project, which honestly made me feel But I think if you don't challenge yourself creatively or accept the challenges that come your way, you'll never really grow. With this in mind, I started researching design of Minas Tirith and re-watched the videos from the creators from the first round. They're all such great projects and ideas and are executed so well. I dived into the film footage of Gandalf riding through the city, as well as the behind the scenes videos, and started to take a closer look at the buildings and their features. When it comes to creating anything, I always feel like it should be driven by a story, a character who lives in the building perhaps, which then helps to add life and believability to the piece. This building is seen from a few different angles as Gandalf arrives through the city, and it really caught my eye. The building had real character with the pillars and the arches and the sculpted details, and I started to think about its role in the White City. I also found these pillars and this statue decorating the wall, which I think will find its way into my build. It really made me think about a place of importance, not quite royalty, but also not the bottom of the food chain. I started thinking about traders and merchants of old, but also someone who's a collector and also an experienced adventurer for hire, seeking out relics of history for the great houses of Middle-earth, always trying to trade his way to the top layer of Minas Tirith where he believes he and his ancestors belong. I'll continue to think about that as I work on the project, but for now, I'll sketch down some ideas and study those details, and I'll try and formulate a plan designed for taking this model from here and getting it into Lockie's hands in Australia. As I did for my M&Hen board, I work out the scale and dimensions of the structure using the models themselves. In this case, a couple of Minas Tirith warriors currently serving in the prime department of my backlog. Using the model to work out a general size of the door, from there I reference the film and art books, and I can very loosely start to sketch out the details which will make up the structure. Once I've settled on a final design, I can move on to materials, which I have to give a massive shout out to Michael and That One Videos for really taking me under his wing and helping me with the foam I needed, YouTube stuff, and just for being really supportive. So thank you, Michael, I really appreciate it. At this point, I'm looking at the materials and work ahead, not really knowing how to do the bigger stuff like the large wall sections and the roof, but one thing I am really comfortable with is the smaller details, which I can 3D sculpt and print. I started by creating the basic shape of the front facade, the pillars above with the sweeping arches. I saw these on the behind the scenes footage and thought it would be a nice little touch of detail, so I modelled them and sculpted in the high-res details. I continue to sculpt in details, adding some history to the pieces to show their age. A nice little modelling trick is to create a black and white image of something that may be otherwise a little bit complex to create, and use that image to pull the details out. I use this process for the white tree decorations as well as the door handle. As I continue to develop a narrative around the merchant adventurer, I thought it'd be good to add a rear doorway underneath this part of the building, a place where we could unload items away from prying eyes. I also didn't know where the building would sit once it got into Lockie's hands, so I wanted to add something to the side wall of the building, and I found this statue while I was researching the buildings. I decided to repurpose one of my M&Hen statues. I added some hands to hold the hilt of the sword, and I reposed the model, and then it was all ready for printing. With the parts printed, I cleaned and test fitted all of the pieces. I saw these on a behind the scenes shot and I thought I could incorporate them into my build as well. Then it was on to sanding and test fitting the parts together, drilling and pinning parts for construction before a final clean. The parts were glued together and gap filled with green stuff where it was required. I started the construction by using some cheap insulation foam as a main building block, which I could then attach the printed parts and XPS foam to. I cut the foam to allow for a 20mm gap. That way I could add the foam to each side and then the piece that runs over the archways as well. But first I needed to drop the level of the first floor landing as it was a little bit too high for the design. I measured and cut away a piece of the foam so I could add a smaller piece of 6mm XPS foam into it and do some detailing. I didn't cut it anywhere near flat, so I used modelling compound to try and level the foam. I guess this is where a hot wire cutter would have been pretty useful. Once it was in place, I added some cocktail sticks to secure it to the foam, and then I used some Geek Gaming fast drying basing glue to add another layer on top, because I also cut the depth wrong. I glued that down and pinned it in place and measured some squares for slab detail and used a pen to add some small details and then added some age using a ball of tin foil. Now this was by far the hardest part for me. I lined up the model against the foam to construct the front wall. I added the brick details in, and I carefully cut the arches out using a hobby knife. I did this 4 times before I even got close to something half decent, but with the details done, I pinned the archways to the foam. I then used green stuff to fill the gaps left behind by my amateur cutting effort, adding details to try and help marry the archway to the foam. I then carefully removed a triangular piece of foam to allow that decoration panel to be added into the piece, and honestly I was so happy to get to this point. I then turned my attention to the rear stairway, cutting away a piece of the foam and using hot glue to attach it in place. I then cut and added another piece of foam to the back to thicken out the centre and incorporate the wall. I added more foam for the first floor slabs, detailed it to match what was already there, and I created a new inner wall part from the design. Working next on the courtyard area, I cut some foam for the walls to hold the arches, measuring and cutting where required so it would fit over the rear stairway. I added some steps, detailed the foam, and I will keep this part separate as it will make it easier to pack. I created the door using the same technique Eric from Eric's Hobby Workshop used in his build. I cut a piece of card, glued some wooden coffee stirrers to it, and using scissors I cut away any excess. Using a small drill bit, I created some lines to really make the wood effect pop, added some braces and the door detail I created, and yeah, really happy with that. I measured and cut some 6mm foam for the roof and pinned it into place. Added some smaller pieces to the edges with basing glue and used some foil to age it a little. I added green stuff for anywhere where I'd use cocktail sticks to try and tidy it all up a bit. It's actually starting to look like something now. I was really pleased with it. The statue detail on the side was next. I glued and pinned the parts and cut a piece of 20mm foam, adding in the brickwork the same way I'd done so far. I laid the pieces down and worked out where I'd like the wall recessed. I cut out the square, added a little bit of detail, and then carefully cut it along the depth. I added in brick detail to tie the 2 pieces together. I added some smaller pieces of foam to make a simple platform along the bottom, pinned the models into the foam, and used glue and cocktail sticks to attach the side wall to the main structure, adding a new roof platform above the new wall. I'm using spray cans to prime the model, so I added a layer of Mod Podge to the foam to help protect it. Once all that was dry, I went outside, laid out all of the models, and primed them. I got some oil paint and started with a light grey, as I could always build up from there if I wanted to add a darker stain to the foam. I used a test piece to try it out first. Once I was happy with the consistency, I painted up all of the stonework. I used a series of washes for the door, as well as some orange and copper paint for the metal railing, finishing off with the dirty down verdigris. I painted the door detail metal and added a wash, and then a dry brush to age it, and I glued it in place. And then I glued the statue and the pillar models in place as well. With time to allow the oil wash to dry properly, I turned my attention to the shingles. I used card and white glue to create a series of tiles, finished off with a coat of grey paint. As I apply the final oil washes and pigment powder to this project, it's reaching its end goal. A fully realised Minas Tirith house which will sit alongside some other incredible builds. Thank you so much, Lockie, for inviting me onto this journey. It's been absolutely amazing. But what is the story of this Minas Tirith resident? An adventurer, a dealer, and purveyor of rare items and objects of power from the many scattered battlefields of Middle-earth, where stories mixed with superstition make some people believe that these objects will bring them fortune and status. He is himself trading to move himself up into the highest levels of Minas Tirith, among the power and influence he believes he was born to be among. Where battles are fought, the caster is wrought, on land, in barrows and foul dark hallows. Working on this project has been such a great adventure. It's been everything I wanted it to be. Collaborative, great people, a lot of learning, and realising the final piece I can be proud of, and contributing to the greatest Middle-earth project on YouTube. I really couldn't be happier, and I hope you've all enjoyed watching this too. If you have enjoyed it, please like the video and subscribe for more, but please check out everyone else's build below. They're absolutely incredible. Cheers.